Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall in a week where a lot has happened. An awful lot has happened, but unfortunately it's ended with a 2-0 defeat at home to Crystal Palace. Cal, we were there, we were at the game together. It was a very frustrating day, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, to say the least. It was bloody freezing, and I hoped that the football would have warmed us up, but it was actually did quite the opposite. Often we're quite animated in our seats, but there was honestly very little at all to get animated about in this game. So yeah, had some very cold toes by the end of the match.
It was a. Obviously, we're going to talk about West Ham. We'll talk about the different things in the game that went well, some of the things that went very badly in the match. I know the reaction to this game has been quite extreme, actually, online. People very, very, very frustrated. People thought it was a really horrendous performance. But I think we have to kind of contextualise this first by saying, horrendous performance or not, it was a horrendous football match. I think that's the overriding thing, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. Neither team really looked to offer anything. Obviously, it's hindsight. It looks like Crystal Palace obviously came away as the dominant side, but I think anyone that watched the full 90 minutes would say that it was actually just two teams that were almost equally impotent, but just in those moments because of Mateta, essentially. They were able to make those moments count, whereas we just lacked that sort of focal point up top, and ultimately were unable to create very much of anything. But it was a real slog. It was a lot of just teams sort of aimlessly passing round and trying to break through channels, and then because the two systems were almost identical, they just ended up running into a wall and then having to go back, and it was a lot of that for almost all of the game, really.
I think one of the big differences is that Palace were more successful in arriving in the right areas in the final third, but we then defended those situations generally quite well, or managed to get away with it in those moments. The cross wasn't right, or Mavropanos or Gilman manages to get in the way, or it's Guido in the way, particularly in the first half. So it looks better for Palace because they're arriving into the final third much more regularly than we were. A lot of our in possession play was extremely stunted, didn't really go anywhere, didn't really get us to the final third. We had probably an okay first 5 minutes, and then really for much of the rest of the first half it was kind of a bit of a slog from there. But when you're looking at the whole match, and actually production of shots and stuff, XG from open play in the game, and this is the whole game, 0.23 for West Ham plays 0.37 for Crystal Palace. I mean, it's not really much in there at all. In the first half, that's 0.12 open play XG plays 0.13, and just overall XG 0.13 plays 0.15. So I mean, really nothing in the game at all. And then within context, with so many injuries, with fatigue after the last two games, I think the decision to match Palace, which was seen as a bit of a surprise, I think at the start when the lineup came out, to go to that 3-4-2-1 with pretty much three centre backs. I know Cresswell is a fullback, but these days I think is probably more of a wide centre back at this stage of his career. Probably the right thing to do, because in many ways it enabled us to kind of, as we just described, limit them to pretty much nothing, and it put a lot less pressure on us in terms of what we did out of possession, to be really high energy, to be really intense as a way of controlling the game. So I think it enabled us to play a slightly more passive match, really, with Guido kind of hovering between the back three / back five, and then Edson doing his best to get up and support Souček, Paquetá and Kudus. It put us in a position where, after the lung busting runs of Fulham and Villa, and the way that we used our press to generate chances in those games, it put us in a position to kind of just sit a little bit more and I was going to say absorb pressure, but we didn't really have to do that. It was just kind of absorb the game and let the game kind of just wash through, and hope that at a point in the match our quality would show. Obviously that's not what happened, but pre-match I think it still looks like the right call to do that, especially given that if you read afterwards, I think Soler wasn't quite fit enough to start the game. So without him, I mean, what options would we really have had anyway to do something different?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think there was obviously a lot of surprise with regards to the lineup at the start, in part because of the omission of Soler, which we now understand better. And I think, as you say, if he was unable to play, alongside the fact that almost every attacker that we've got is injured, he's probably the one that would maybe enable you, albeit it would still feel somewhat single-handed. He would maybe enable you to go out and do that slightly more aggressive pressing function. And if he's absent alongside everyone else, then it would have kind of been a fool's errand to even try it with the personnel. I think it would have caused more problems than positives, because we would have just got played through, or the recovery speed wouldn't have actually been there to get back if we pushed that far up, and Palace would have had a much...
Can you imagine Guido trying to do...
Well, exactly. We've seen it before, right? And I think, yeah, it probably comes back to something that we've discussed a lot on the pod quite recently, actually, about the sort of micro conditions and looking at which mini battles can you actually come out and succeed in against any given opposition. And I think going into this game, you probably knew that we weren't really going to be a huge threat in transition because we didn't have that much pace in the squad. You probably knew that we were going to struggle really to do any combinative stuff up top because of the three centre-backs that Palace had. Also because of the pace of those centre-backs as well. Any chance to get in behind was nullified. We saw that with Lacroix so often. The cover abilities that he has are just next level. Like, even against Goodall's beating him in a foot race. So that wasn't really an option. And it probably was just a case of, okay, well, it's not the most exciting match plan, but ultimately, if we're doing it on a game-by-game basis where we need to pick up points for the rest of the season, then just trying to nullify Palace and take what we can get isn't the worst case, isn't the worst plan, rather. I think we backed ourselves to defend our box. I think we did it quite well, actually, apart from those two moments. Obviously, one to the penalty, and Mateta, even then, it's a shot outside the box that unfortunately he just rifles into the bottom corner and you can't do much about it. But
it's a great finish. Maybe Fabianski can be a little bit tighter to the near post, and maybe Kilman, if he doesn't quite arrive on such a exaggerated, I mean, sort of arrives on the diagonal really aggressively, which in a way allows Mateta to square up as he does. If he comes a little bit more from behind rather than getting so far in front of him, or more alongside, then Mateta's going to be forced wider. It kind of limits the chance quality. But even like you say, when he gets the chance, it's a shot from the edge of the box. There's only really the near post to aim for. It's a great shot, so it feels harsh to kind of criticise Fabianski, but still in those situations you kind of want your keeper to save.
Yeah, I think people have been critical of Kilman, and I can see why, because it does look quite standoffish, but I would argue that he's probably done everything that you would want him to do. You can't really dive in, because we might be down to 10 men a lot sooner than Mavropanos' challenge. And to be honest, I think as well, and I think this is where it ties to your point regarding Fabianski, I think in doing what Kilman did, he could have narrowed the angle maybe a bit more, but he's obviously shut off the far post option. So Fabianski doesn't even really need to worry about covering that side of the goal, because it's so obvious if he does shoot where it's going to go. So I think, a little bit more reading of the situation from Fabianski, maybe a bit of communication between the two of them would have been better. But ultimately, as you say, Mateta is a good Premier League striker. I think he's proven that over the last couple of seasons, and it was a great finish. And it still came from outside of the box, and it was rare that Palace really got into our box with any sort of high quality chances.
No, it's. I'm not sure that they could have communicated in that moment. That's the only thing I'd pick you up on.
Come on, just shout, boys.
Yeah, it's the only thing I'd pick you up on there. But yeah, I think he's trying. Kilman is trying to shut down the far post. The opportunity to shoot to the far post, but I am always reluctant to criticise keepers, because it's a completely different skill, and I don't have it. I'm not a goalkeeper analyst. It's a completely different set of skills to be a goalkeeper, and a completely different set of skills to understand what goalkeepers should do, how they should react in different situations. And there are lots of different sort of goalkeeper moments in this game. I think he does very well to save Nketiah's first 1v1. The second 1v1, I think he probably rushes too early. He thinks he's going to come much more narrow. The ball actually ends up being a lot wider, and Wan-Bissaka's there, and he ends up bringing him down. And then obviously there's the penalty, which in some ways he's diving for the corner, and he's just been done by how shit the penalty was. Which ends up looking really bad because he's gone that way, but he's diving far enough to get to the corner, and he's just done by how bad the penalty is, as we've just said. If we're going to talk about the first goal, and we're jumping a little bit ahead here because I've got to loop back around to stuff that's in the plan that comes before the first goal, but we'll do it now because we're there. I think the main thing that is problematic with that, more so than Kilman, more so than Fabianski, is that you can see in the second half that we did make changes to try and up the intensity. I think you look at Guido and Edson, and we'll come on to this, Rodriguez and Alvarez, sorry, and we'll come on to this talking about kind of the midfields and what happened in the first half and why the first half was quite so kind of stuck in the mud and neither team could really create anything. But when you're looking at it in that context, it kind of makes the decision a little bit easier, I think, to switch and to change and to go for Soler, make a halftime substitution, and try and up that intensity, try and use the defence as a means of generating chances again, like we had done in the Villa and Fulham match. And think maybe because we've taken the first 45 minutes out, we've killed the first 45 minutes, limiting that to just a 45-minute effort might be more successful, and the players might be able to do that in terms of the energy and the legs and stuff. And ultimately, all that happens is it just instantly backfires. We go high to press in a way that we just hadn't really for the entirety of the first half, straight off of kickoff really for the second half. And I think the initial pressure is really good from the front line, and all that happens is you just don't get that then following support, which is required from the midfield and back line, which is what we highlighted on the show last week, what we highlighted on YouTube on our breakdown. We were talking about, big positive shift really had been the more decisive collective commitment to team pressure, the team-led pressure rather than individual-led pressure. And you see that led by the team at the top of the pitch in the second half. But it's almost as if Alvarez and Mavropanos are kind of still in the first half. But even then, I mean, Mavropanos, at moments when Eze has kind of dropped in, first 10 minutes, Mavropanos is all over him. He's up, higher than the midfield when Eze is dropping to try and contest duels to force him off the ball. And then in this moment, for whatever reason, Alvarez is way too slow to notice to commit to Sarr. He's way too Mavropanos is staying on the back line with Kilman, creating that 2v1 on the striker, which ultimately doesn't end up being helpful because he ends up halfway between the back line and Eze, which means he can't really do anything to either of them. He can't affect Eze, stop Eze from turning, stop Eze from passing. He also can't affect or help Kilman in that 1v1 or make it a 2v1 against a Mathiasen, a proper 2v1 against Mathiasen. So it's just it looked, and we got lots of comments about this, it looked very Lopetegui-like. And it was very Lopetegui-like that moment. It was classic of what we saw in the Lopetegui era, in the time where Lopetegui was manager, where you've got some of the team going to press, or often under Lopetegui it was just one or two, and then other parts of the team, most notably usually the back line and defensive midfield, kind of not really committing to what the team ahead of them is doing, and therefore opening vast spaces around the halfway line, usually for creative players to turn and make big impacts, which is exactly what happened in that moment, and far more problematic than what we have with Kilman and, like I say, and Fabianski later, where they're in a much more difficult situation. And it's a very good shot from Mateta, and he handles the run is good, the carry is good. He does very well to square up when Kilman slightly overcommits to so all of the things that Mateta could have done, he did perfectly. And Glasner spoke post-match about if they can give Mateta a chance to shoot around the box, they feel very confident that he's going to hit the target, and actually quite confident that he's going to score in those moments. And he looks like a player who has that self-belief, that self-confidence at the moment. And that was another really big difference between the sides. So if we loop back, because I don't want to get to second half, we kind of pushed way too early in the pod and go back to the first half. Actually, Mateta versus no Mateta is kind of crucial to the whole story of the match, isn't it? And I know neither team were able to really create anything as we've described in the first half, but even then, I think Kudus trying his best through the middle. Maybe perhaps a slight surprise that Kudus went there instead of Paquetá, but I think we were both quite comfortable with the fact that Paquetá had moved to the right, wanted to try and get some better dialogue with the midfield, wanted to try and get some better involvement for Wan-Bissaka, more chances to get balls into the box from that right-hand side, where we would have Souček up against Munoz and Richards, which we would have probably identified as the weaker part of their defence. So really quite sensible, I think, in many ways to move Paquetá out there. Unlikely that he would be able to have the same kind of impact as a hold-up target man kind of option through the middle against three centre-backs, against Lacroix, Guéhi and Richards. So more looking to kind of like drop in the 10 positions exactly in the same way that Eze did a lot of the game for Palace, to engineer opportunities to play wide, get the fullbacks or wing backs high and get balls into the box. like I say, Kudus trying his best then through the middle, but often having to drop really deep to impact the game, or drop wide to impact the game, where, you know, Mateta has probably half the touches, if not fewer, in the first half. But in the moments where he gets on the ball, it's very much as a focal nine. It's very much as the target forward. And that makes just a massive difference to the way in which Palace were able to attack for the whole game compared to what we could do.
Yeah, well, it just gives you an option, doesn't it, that we didn't have. We couldn't really bypass the build-up phase, or if we were struggling to break through the thirds because of how congested it was at times. I think because of the way that the shapes matched up, it did kind of mean that there was always someone to cover their alternative, I guess, their marking assignment. And it did mean, particularly with sort of the players that we had on the pitch, not the most progressive double pivot anyway, it was quite challenging for us to get through. And if we'd have had our own version of Mateta, then it would have been quite easy, or at least preferable, for us to just go, okay, cool, well, let's hit him, and then we'll play off 9, and then we'll get the sort of interior 10s onto the ball by way of link-up. By that time, Wan-Bissaka will have made a run around the outside, we can play him through, and then we can force the cutbacks. But because we didn't have that focal point number 9, it just didn't really give us that option. Even more so the fact that it was Kudus up there to start with. As you said, in those battles, it was never going to work from a sort of physical hold-up point of view. The one benefit you get from Kudus being up there is that pace in behind, but unfortunately it was Gahey and Lacroix that every time he tried to run in behind, they were just like, okay, cool, we can do that.
In the back line, like anytime you, and that is one thing I will say massively, you know, to Palace's credit. I think you look at that back line, and we talked a lot about their dueling numbers in our work before the game in Pretty Much Pack in the preview podcast. We talked again about it in our article in the West Ham programme about the fact that there was some vulnerability there to some of the physical duels, particularly in the box, and that sometimes this season when balls have come into the box for a team defending with a back five, often with two defensive midfielders as well, you kind of would hope that they would defend those moments a little bit better than they have at points this season. And there are too many goals that have come from sort of loose balls dropping in the box, not, you know, players not actually getting to those balls. And also a large part of that comes from the fact that none of the centre-backs are massively dominant, and they don't have a Thomas Souček. They don't have that kind of profile who, when you do whip the ball into the box, is someone who's going to head it out, and not just head it and win the duel and it drops 5 yards still inside the box. Someone who's going to head it and it's going to go 10 yards outside of the box and give you a chance to reset and defend. You know, we spoke about that as a weakness, but actually they addressed the way in which you would get into the final third kind of differently, and it was with the fact that they could be so aggressive in the wide centre-back positions because of the unbelievable pace they had in the back line. So if a Richards goes high and doesn't win his duel and gets beaten and the space opens at right centre-back, Lacroix is there before you've even had time to think about it. And if Lacroix goes high up against the 9 and steps out, tries to win a duel and actually doesn't win it, or gets spun or gets beaten, whatever, Gahey's already there again before you've had time to think about it. He's filled the slot at central centre back because he's just so quick at covering the space. So something that we maybe didn't identify, or well, we probably did identify, but didn't focus on enough before the game, and then really saw the impact of in the game. Actually, how if you construct a defence that backs off in the way that they do when they're in the lead, because in the second half you see them just kind of like anytime you play into one of them's hands, it's like, well, you know, Valhalla, we're going back towards our own goal, and you can't play in behind us because we're so quick. And then in the first half, the opposite, when you're stepping up, you've got the covering speed to deal with that should you make a mistake. So actually, in some ways, although, you know, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, particularly from Lacroix in the physical duels. I would have liked to see him be more aggressive, more dominant in those moments, more dominant in the tackle, more reliable. You know, some silly fouls in there from him as well. I think they get away with that because of what they've constructed in terms of the, you know, the physical qualities they have in the back line to cover in those moments. So also with Munoz and Mitchell, who have got real pace as well and are good at covering too. So if one of the wide centre-backs gets pulled narrow, you can be relatively confident that Munoz or Mitchell will work incredibly hard to get into the right space to provide cover too. So impressed with how hard they worked. You referenced the double pivot and the fact that we couldn't play off 9 and therefore we couldn't cut out build up, and then we had to play more through midfield. And we spoke there. When we skipped ahead and talked about the first goal, we spoke about how it made it easier. Their performance made it easier to kind of go, well, let's take Rodriguez off, let's bring Soler on, and let's look to be a bit more aggressive in our press as a way of generating chances. When you compare Hughes and Kamada to Rodriguez and Alvarez as the two midfield departments in the game, in many ways, you would expect Hughes and Kamada to be more progressive than Rodriguez and Alvarez would be able to be. But then conversely, you would expect Rodriguez and Alvarez to be far more physically dominant, to be able to really patrol that central area and dominate physically that central area. When actually you find in the game, it's only one ground duel won for us. In midfield, I think it was only one. I think it might actually be zero ground duels won for Hughes and Kamada. So quite a lot of fouls actually from the two midfield units. But 9 tackles and interceptions combined between Hughes and Kamada, just 6 for Rodriguez and Alvarez. And I understand that obviously Rodriguez was hooked at half time, which will impact those numbers. But if you extrapolate that out and say maybe it would have been 9-9, there's not really a physical mismatch in there being provided by Alvarez and Rodriguez. And then progressively, 16 progressions, either by pass or carry from Hughes and Kamada, to just 4 from Alvarez and Rodriguez. And therein you can really identify the problem that we experienced in the first half, which was we just didn't have the quality in midfield to do the little bits that Hughes does, the little bits that Kamada does, pulling out into the right space, the other midfielder then identifying where they need to move off of that to cause a problem for us defensively. We're going to come on and talk about, 2v1s against Souček, all this stuff, just understanding of the shape, understanding of the system, understanding of where to move, understanding of how to work together, and then the quality to then, in the moment where you get the ball, to find a pass into an Eze, to find a pass into Asar, to hit Mateta. They had that in midfield. We did not at all.
Yeah, I think particularly in the first half, obviously Guido goes off at half time, but it is a lot of the reason we sort of came unstuck in moments that we did come unstuck. I think they did a solid enough job when we were deep enough to just shut up shop and, as we've already discussed, limit it. But when it came to sort of winning the ball back in our own half and trying to play forward, it just wasn't what you needed really, and it was like simple stuff as well. I think there was one particular moment where Guido sort of received the ball on the edge of our box and we were trying to play out through the press, and it would have actually been a really good breakaway had the ball gone to Cresswell, but he slightly the weight on the pass was probably fine actually, but it was just a couple of meters too far ahead, and Cresswell, not being the fastest of defenders anyway, wasn't able to latch onto it, and then that resulted in a chance for Palace. And I think there were similar moments for Alvarez as well, where he was sort of gave the ball away, and neither of them were then able to sort of rectify their mistakes, which is something that we've obviously discussed previously this season. But yeah, it just made things very, very difficult for us. And I think as well, sort of Guido in particular, I would say, is meant to be one of the players that is, considered extremely press resistant. And I think, to be fair, against Fulham, we did see that. Some of the tidy sort of short passing work to sort of play through the press, drag players out. I would say he probably didn't get that much opportunity to actually do that sort of really tight space manipulation work against Palace, because I don't think he ever necessarily got on the ball enough, and I don't think Palace would really too bothered about being super aggressive against him anyway. And it almost felt at times like Guido had too much time on the ball when he had it, and then was a bit lost as to what to do with it. And I think that issue was then compounded by the fact that I think we have a centre-back partnership who, under previous manager, probably didn't have as much license to carry forward or to play those risky passes. And I think in those moments when you've got Guido and Edson ahead of you, the onus, whether you like it or not, probably then does fall backwards onto the centre-backs to be the progressive fulcrums of this team. And unfortunately, we just didn't see that. We saw it in moments with progressive carries. I think it was Mavropanos in particular had that one carry that took us basically into their defensive third, definitely beyond the halfway line. But there were other moments where Mavropanos was stood with his foot on the ball and Paquetá or whoever was ahead of him in the pocket, and one vertical pass fizzed into feet would have been enough for us to play through the midfield, particularly because Kamada found himself out of position quite a lot. He was either too far forward or not really blocking that lane. but it just doesn't seem like that's really natural to them at the minute. It's obviously within their skill set, it's within their wheelhouse. We've seen them do it before at different clubs, but it's not the first instinct for them at the minute. Hopefully that comes with time. Obviously they've not had a great deal of time under Potter, but yeah, that sort of it's weird to call it the box because it's not the box as such, but that box between the centre backs and the double pivot, complete lack of progression it felt like, or at least from what we actually need from them for this system to work.
Absolutely, in terms of what we need for the system to work. And then also I think you have to then re-reference when you're talking about the centre-backs and their ability to be progressive, that physical mismatch on the back line. So like Paquetá has completed 57% of his passes, I think, in the game, lost pretty much every duel where Gahey was up pushing against him. So if you're Mavropanos in those situations and you're thinking, yeah, I could fire the ball through here to Paquetá, but on the last 5 occasions we found Paquetá, he's lost it straight away. Yeah. You have that slight reluctance, and then again that's compounded by, okay, and then I'm not going to play that. I looked to my midfield, neither Alvarez or Rodriguez are showing for the ball. Well, I guess I better turn this thing around and go back to Fabianski long, and then it's an aerial duel between Kudus and Lacroix, which you can't win, and that's kind of the story of the match that we experienced in the first half. We've got a couple of other bits tactically to round up, and then we're going to come on to some other changes in the second half. I really want to talk about Lewis Orford and Ollie Scarles and the way that we reacted to going 1-0 down. But I know we're massively late on a break, so let's take a little pause here. So we talked about issues that we had in midfield, issues that we had progressively, issues that we had on the front line holding the ball up, issues that we had in the physical sort of aerial duels when we had to go long. So lots of problems across the West Ham side in this game. And again, I would talk about injuries. So it's a completely different story. If you've got Fulkrug up front for us, Mateta up front for them, then okay, the scales are somewhat balanced here, and we can have a proper, ding dong. And then when you need to go long, we can press you. You can go long, and we can contest the aerials. And actually, I think in some of the ground duels against Mateta, we were horrific. But in the aerial duels against Mateta, I actually thought we did quite well. I think for the most part, that was well contested, and Kilman gave it a really good go. I think Mateta only won, was it 2 aerials in the game, something like that. Really low number, which shows that actually in the back line we've done relatively well at contesting.
1 of 7.
1 of 7, there you go. So really, really low return from Mateta in those situations. So again, just to reference that, I think it's some really important context for the game that it's completely different, all the stuff that we're just speaking about, if a striker is fit, if even a couple of other forwards are fit, because then you can throw a Paquetá or a more creative midfielder into the double pivot alongside Rodriguez, where Rodriguez press resistance might dovetail slightly better with someone who can be a bit more progressive, a bit more creative. Whereas when he's alongside Alvarez, who's not really doing anything when he gets those extra seconds on the ball, it doesn't really offer us much at all. And you think, well, what's Rodriguez doing? What's Alvarez doing? There's no progression in there whatsoever. With all those issues spoken about, fatigue was a big part of it as well. Potter spoke about it after the match, and we've already talked about in this podcast the fact that we couldn't really press as intensely as we liked right from the off, because we just didn't have the energy in the legs after the games that we've played previously within the last week prior to this game, or 8 days prior to this game. One thing I want to give Palace a lot of credit for, and we've spoken about their back line, we've spoken about Mateta playing very well. I mean, I don't want this to be a big Palace puff piece, but I do think that the way that they used the ball, particularly early in the match, so they settled on the ball very quickly, which I think was a really, really sensible, good thing to do in an away performance, coming up against a side that's been a little bit resurgent in the last 2 games, has played with a lot of intensity. The way that they settled and played around the back line, just incessantly side to side between Gahey, Lacroix and Richards, into a Hughes or into a Sarr, and then back again, and then lots more passes between the back three. I thought that was really, really sensible, because it kind of killed any early intensity or early momentum in the game, and kind of immediately they put their stamp on it and kind of said, no, we're happy to play at this tempo, and you're going to have to come down and play at this tempo, which in many ways was fine for us too, because we didn't want to play with the same level of intensity that we had in the previous games. What they then did, though, was brilliant in terms of compounding the fatigue that we had in our legs. And that is really about Hughes and Kamada, who we've obviously already given praise to, and then creating a 2v1 on the far side against Soucek, because with our midfield, one going and one staying. You've got Alvarez stepping up and Rodriguez actually staying closer to the defence. It means that on one side of the pitch, you're going to have a little bit more room to exploit in your deep build-up, because Alvarez will be high, lots of pressure on one side, Rodriguez deep on the other side. A lot bigger gap between Souček and Rodriguez in our team than there is between Paquetá and Alvarez, so a lot more room to play in. Sensible from us, I think, to do that on the side that Richards is on, because he was probably the lowest impact player from a build-up perspective in Palace's lineup, so sensible to give him the extra time on the ball. But two things. Hughes pulling out, absolutely excellent, right? Did very well in those spaces. And Chris Richards, not sure what he's done with the real Chris Richards, but I mean, he was actually really good in those moments. So they did a really good job of forcing Souček to basically do a lot of running around, out to Richards, back to Hughes, out to Richards again, back to Hughes, out to Richards, back to Hughes, Cresswell coming out, Rodriguez, you're going to have to do these shuttle runs between midfield and defence. And I thought they really, really good at kind of, we don't have to generate a chance here. Actually, all we have to do is knock the ball around and just tire West Ham out slowly with the way that we're going to move the ball.
Yeah, I think we remarked on it in probably around the 35-minute mark, I would say, after Souček had done probably for the 10th time that sort of shuttle run between, I'm closing down the pivot, now I'm closing down Richards, I'm going to run back to Hughes, and he just looked absolutely knackered. I think it was at that point we actually suggested that when he retires he should be a marathon runner, because he's really tall, and if he shedded a bit of timber he'd probably be very quick, because his engine is unbelievable. So yeah, I mean, of all the players in our team that I would want to have to do that sort of grueling shift, it is him, and he did it. Like, he didn't sulk, or he didn't get sort of, there was no huffing about, why am I being put in this situation? He just got on with the task at hand. But yeah, it was a very good way for Palace to very quickly deplete that engine of his, and 15 minutes into the second half, you can tell that he's sort of like just out on his feet at that point. Like, you see him drop a little bit deeper into midfield. Eventually, he obviously goes to centre back, although that's a matter of circumstance more than anything. But probably was a welcome break for him, actually, to just stand around at the back.
You could really see the tank was empty. When he went into midfield, you could see that all that work that he'd done trying to get out to press Richards. I spoke about Hughes pulling out. It's difficult to kind of do that again. I know the podcast goes out on YouTube, and a lot of people have said, can we get more, tack board stuff? Can we get more stills from the game? Obviously, because it's also on Spotify, and we have lots of listeners on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, we don't want to just throw loads of visuals in, because it would make it very hard for people who are listening to just the audio. But of course, we are going to keep doing these YouTube shows where we get to break into little bits and kind of show you these on the board, show you these with some match examples. The best way I can explain it is that Hughes and Kamada did a really good job of detaching from the centre of the pitch and moving out into the wide areas, almost where you'd imagine a wing back to be. And then that really causes a massive tension for Souček. Do I go all the way wide with Hughes, or do I go to Richards? And a lot of the time, he starts central with Hughes. He goes out to Richards. Hughes then exploits the space in the wide area. So now you're going to have to turn around and sprint back to me to stop me from going forward with the ball. And Hughes really sensibly in those moments, because I think they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Instead of playing forward in a lot of those moments, we'll go, right, I'll receive the ball, wait for you to come, and then I'm going back to Richards, and you're going to have to turn back around and run all the way back there. And that just really played, I think, on the legs and energy that we had in the team. And later in the match, I mean, Palace don't really create anything until kind of the last 15 minutes is when they started creating more opportunities. He got Nketiah, gets him behind just before the red card. Then the red card happens. That obviously compounds fatigue further, because we're down a man less at that point. And that's, I think, when you could really see in that period of the match. And even actually in the period where we started to play with the ball a little bit more, we had a little bit more of the ball, you could see the intensity that we were able to kind of muster in those periods had kind of been massively dulled by all that Palace had done in the first half. And I think, again, a really nice bit of context here, because when you see all of that running having to be done on the left side of the pitch, because we know we've got Guido in deeper midfield who's not going to commit to the press in the same way. We know we've got Cresswell behind that, who's probably a slower wide centre-back, can't get out and be really aggressive in the same way that a Mavropanos can be. You think, well, why on earth has he put Souček at left wing? Who put Souček at left wing? It's exactly what Cal said. Who in the squad, if you know you're not going to be able to press from deeper, or in the two positions deeper on that side of the pitch, who do you in the squad look to to go and give you a massive tank of gas to run around endlessly and basically cover 2 or 3 players' jobs out of possession.
I reckon Potter's just requested the latest bleep test results.
Yeah, exactly.
Saw Souček had won and was like, right, sound, out you get.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of can only be Souček, right? And again, I think another thing where you turn around as a West Ham fan and just say, so frustrating the number of injuries we have, because if you've got Bowen in the front line, it's not really to worry. You know, I know it's on the other side of the pitch, but you're going to get that intensity then from the front line, and you don't have to worry so much about, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to have to, because you can then play Souček deeper in midfield, and Rodriguez isn't on the pitch, then you get the intensity coming from midfield, and then it's all less of a concern. But because he's not there, and because Bowen's not there, because Fulcrum's not there, because you can't get that intensity on the front line, that's when you're forced into these really awkward compromises in selection where you can't really get the lineup you want.
Yeah.
But you have to make these decisions in a way to cope with what you have.
Yeah, and I think also if we had even just a handful, like 2 or 3 more players fit, Potter could prepare for the match knowing that at the 60-minute mark I can replace that player and maintain that level of intensity just with fresh legs. But he's going into this game knowing full well that realistically I'm going to need to have players on the pitch that I can rely on to last at least 80 to 85 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to experience a significant drop-off or have to make a huge tactical tweak because the profiles are nowhere near the same. So I think that's another factor of it. It's like, okay, yeah, Souček didn't maintain the same level of... Well, he's never especially intense in terms of his running, but in terms of his ground coverage, he's reliable. And I think that probably forced his hand as much as anything. It's just like, well... I know that Souček, whatever I ask him to do, he'll do it for as long as I ask him to do it. And unfortunately, I don't have the option of bringing on a Somerville who didn't quite make it for fitness reasons, or I've got a half-fit Soler, but realistically, I'm probably going to need to use him to replace any one of the other midfielders because we might need a little bit of progression at some point because I've got Eddie and Guido at the base. So, yeah, I think it's all a massive instance of circumstance, really, isn't it? But I also think, I don't think you referenced it, but the sort of... we didn't actually see it play out, but also when we're looking at it from a sort of why do we think Potter made this decision from a tactical point of view going into the game, having Souček on that side, if you're going to try and get Wan-Bissaka whipping balls into the box,
yeah, exactly,
having Souček crashing the back post on Richards, who, though he had a good game, you would look at those 3 centre-backs and go, that's the one that we look to exploit. Sort of having that mismatch of Souček attacking the back post, Richards trying to handle that aerial presence, is a good thing to bake into the system, albeit a little unorthodox because you think, left winger needs to be pacey. It's not really a left winger in this system. It's very much a 10, at times a left central midfielder if we're deep. But then, yeah, as you say, having that box crashing element is great, but we just, because of sort of the shape and the matchup and Palace being able to handle it quite well, didn't really get to create that many opportunities to do that. But I think when you zoom out and go, okay, but what if we had been able to do it? Tactically, it would have made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's important to say at this stage that, you know, we're not... I don't think either of us think 2-0 defeat against Palace at home is a good result. I think and I actually don't think either of us think that the individual performances that we got in this game were good enough either.
No,
what we're saying, I think, is tactically there were a huge number of limitations there, and it was very difficult for the manager to kind of come up with a structure, with a strategy that was going to enable us to be successful across 90 minutes. And then actually what we see in the game is we see the limitations of the squad with all of these injuries playing out on the pitch, and individual players' limitations having a big impact on the result, which suggests more either that, and this is the way I look at it, that you just need to get players back fit, and when you've got this many players out in kind of the same department, it has huge knock-on impacts for the rest of the squad, especially when a manager's kind of just through the door and you haven't had years of working together and you've not got kind of all the ideas aren't super really well baked in, so you can just throw, you know, guys that haven't been involved at all straight onto the pitch because they've been training with you for, you know, a year, 18 months, 2 years. They know exactly what the requirements are. They've been doing it in the youth academy or whatever. It's a much harsher transition, I think, if you're a young player coming in for Potter now, because it's like, well, new manager, haven't had much time to absorb the ideas, haven't really had a full training session because it's all been recovery or activation for the next game. Lots of pressure really to come in here and make a big impact straight away without that tactical grounding necessarily that might come with that. That does come with more time to work as a group, with more time to become familiar with each other, with more information about each other. And I think Potter referenced all that post-match. He was speaking about, more information is good for us, and I think we learned a lot from the different things that we saw today. It wasn't good enough, but we can take a lot from it. We can learn a lot of lessons from it, which is good. I think good to get at least that from the game. The other way you could look at it is the squad's is not right in these different areas and needs a lot of patching up. And I think that's absolutely fair as well. I think you want to be, okay, all the forwards are out. Well, at least we know we can rely on this quality in midfield to help us progress up the pitch and help us control the game in that way. And we don't have that. And that is a really big problem to have in your kind of defensive midfield unit, to not have someone that you can kind of hang your hat on and say, well, I know he's going to give us 4 progressive carries, or I know he's going to give us, 6 to 8 progressive passes, or help control the game and get on the ball a lot and be really useful for us in terms of controlling momentum and stuff like that. Kind of exactly as Will Hughes was for Crystal Palace, like not the most amazingly progressive player, not the most amazingly destructive player, but you can kind of hang your hat on Will Hughes like you could Mark Noble and say, well, he's going to get on the ball a huge amount. He's going to control the tempo for us. He's going to conduct the team. He's going to give us 110%. Not possible, but absolute maximum he's able to give on the pitch will be given. I think we can say that we'll get the maximum from players, but the maximum maybe isn't enough for what we require in that area of the pitch. And that really gives way now to discuss what we did when we were 1-0 down, which was 3 big changes. Lewis Orford, first senior appearance. Ollie Scarles, 5th or 6th senior appearance. And Danny Ings, 792nd senior appearance. I kid. So 2 very young players and 1 player right at the end. And we moved to a bit of a 4-2-2 instead of the matched up 3-4-3. And it wasn't perfect at all. But what we saw in that period, I was really pleased with the way the squad reacted, with the way that we tried to push, with the intensity we got from Wan-Bissaka and Scarles down the outside, playing the flanks alone, which is it's a tough old shift, and they've both played a lot over the last. There's been big sort of physical commitments from those players. Scarles not really had that experience of senior football, done a lot in the last few games, and obviously big emotional thing as well, big psychological impact of like new manager comes in and bang, I'm straight in as an option, lots of pressure. So really impressed actually with how hard they both work to get up and down and give us something in the final third, help out to get back with just the 2, Kilman and Mavropanos at the base. But more so than any of the others, and we're going to speak about him more in extra time, so I don't want to nick all of it. I thought Lewis Orford, who's come in for a lot of criticism post-match, I think that's completely unwarranted, and we're going to do this as a feature on YouTube as well this week. Charlie's sitting as producer in the background. It's first he's heard of it, but I've planned it this morning. I thought, compared to what we got out of Rodriguez and Alvarez in terms of exactly what we're describing in that kind of Will Hughes, Mark Noble kind of, I'm going to get on the ball, I'm going to take responsibility, I'm going to do the simple things, bouncing it back into the defence, I'm going to move out into useful spaces which pull the press or pull players in the press into positions they don't want to be in. I thought he made a massive impact on the game and gave us just the smallest little period of more dominance, of more sustained attack, of an ability to control the ball for longer periods, which Glasner spoke about in his post-match press conference, which is a big, from a very disappointing result, from a disappointing game, from a poor football match, a huge positive to take away.
Yeah, I think it was, We were both in the press conference where we were just kind of, as much as I tried to avoid it, reading through some of the stuff that was being said post-match just to try and get a litmus test on the feeling of the fan base. And I was so surprised by the stuff that was being said about Orford. I get it. I think it's more a product of the frustration of the match result itself and the game state and the team's inability to progress. But when you strip it back, look at Edson and Guido together, managed to string together 2 passes into the final third combined, and that's 2 very senior, very highly thought of. One of them cost us a lot of money, one of them almost cost Barcelona a lot of money. Orford comes on the pitch and manages 3 in the 35 minutes that he was on the pitch. So I know that in moments it did feel frustrating because he was just knocking it back into the centre back, but at times that's kind of what you have to do. It's not just, oh, he's going backwards. It's no, he's playing it back to the centre-back in the hope that the centre midfielder behind him has pressed up so that the centre-back can now have a favourable passing angle that I've just created. It's not just a case of being a backwards pass merchant or whatever people want to call it. And again, he's got 2 mentions in this podcast, which is impressive, but it's kind of what Noble used to do so well as well, right? He'd just take up positions on the pitch, he'd buzz around, he'd attract opposition players towards him, be that facilitator in midfield, and then rely on the other players that he's creating these passing lanes for to then thread the ball through. And I guess we come full circle because I think, again, it falls on the fact that the centre-backs probably weren't picking up the progressive mantle as much as we would like them to be. There were so many times where Orford would sort of pull someone across, ping it back into Mavro, and then you just want that first time instinctive ball straight out to
through.
Yeah, and it just didn't come. And that's not really Orford's fault, but it looks like Orford's fault because he's the one that's played the backwards pass. But really, he's opened up a really good opportunity that just the rest of the team didn't manage to capitalise on. So, yeah, I thought it was a bit disappointing what we heard about Orford. I think a lot of it just gets caught up in the fact that people were annoyed that we didn't win, and obviously we'd come off the back of a quite impressive or at least exciting performance against Fulham, and then it feels like we've crashed back down to ground zero. I get all of that, but come on, like, let's not get on his back. The lad's made his professional debut for West Ham, and to be honest, I agree with you. I think he was completely like a fine performance and better than both Guido and Alvarez had managed to do in the hour that they were on the pitch.
Yeah, I think what needs to be understood here is that, you know, being risk averse in your first appearance is natural. Having a bit of nerves in the first 15 minutes when you first come on, natural. And I thought that was all there. I thought it was a bit too risk averse, bit too nervous in the first 10 to 15 minutes. What we saw after that was actually really very good. And I know it's all quite simple, as Cal's described, but it really helps the team to progress. And I think sometimes the expectations of a number 6 are a bit ridiculous in that they receive and what they're meant to spin their man, go and dribble 2 others, and then knock a pass into, you know, that unlocks everything for the attack. Now, a lot of the time, what you need your 6 to do is to be available, to move into the right spaces, to get on the ball, to pull one of the opposition players out of position following them, and then to play often a quite simple pass, either back into the defence or into their midfield partner, which then opens up an opportunity to progress from there. And I thought the box that we saw towards the end of the game that had him and Soler often appearing in the 2 deepest positions actually gave us much more opportunity to kind of progress and control the match. And then what we suffered from was that we've got Alvarez and Souček as the 2 points of the box in those moments, so you don't actually then have the creativity at 10, which is again limitations of the squad. So in that period where finally we've taken a bit of a grip, small but a bit of a grip, you know, 60 to 75, 60 to that kind of period, 55 to 75, bit of a grip on the game, bit of control, bit better in build up, bit better ability to play through, bit better ability to arrive in the middle third. If you then have Somerville as one of the points of the box, if you then have Bowen as one of the points of the box, if Paquetá wasn't completely shaken and had to come off at 55 minutes, and he was one of the points of the box, then you've got your quality, and then you can arrive and start to cause them problems in the final third. And I think that's so key, again, to the entire narrative of the match. Look, we've kind of run right to the end of the podcast, and we haven't even got to the final section, which we're going to roll over into extra time now, which is the whole second half of the podcast available, patreon.com/Analytics United. Been amazing, by the way, the number of people who've signed up over the last week, and really, really glad to see so many new faces. Lovely to have so many new people on the Discord. Lovely to have so many new people tuning in to all the various shows. And as soon as this is done, I'm moving straight on to preparing for the next game, going back over the footage from the Villa match, going back over their footage from their last match, and producing that for pre-match pack and the preview podcast, which are the 2 other sorts of real core shows that we do each week. Lots of effort goes into them, and with lots of data analysis and some nice tableaus that you can look at. And even when this comes out, there's a huge detailed tableau file looking at all the data from the match and the different things that different players do, using some of our own data as well. So bits in there that are really worth checking out, and I hope to see you on all of that stuff. The last thing I'm going to ask you, Cal, before you head off is, just as we've been recording this, there's been some news breaking about Kyle Macaulay potentially leaving Chelsea to reunite with Graham Potter at West Ham, and I know that will cause a bit of a stir, and people will be talking about it. So I should ask you, who the hell is Kyle Macaulay, and what does that mean for the kind of infrastructure behind the scenes at West Ham?
Yeah, I mean, first thing to say is I would be pretty excited. He's got a great track record, very well thought of. Obviously, we're getting him from Chelsea, where he arrived with Graham Potter. But I think if you're going to judge him, you probably want to look at the sort of work he did at Swansea and then Brighton after that. But I think the first thing to note is that he's been with Potter since the days of Ostersund in Sweden. He was a central part of their sort of rise, ascent, whatever you want to say, up from the fourth tier to the top tier, along with Potter. And there, I think his role was more... It began as sort of more of a match analyst, performance analyst, looking at how the players that they had at their disposal were doing well, where they could improve, how they could sort of affect the system a little bit more positively, in part because they were obviously so low down the tier that they couldn't really go out and scout all these players and attract players, because convincing someone to come and join a fourth tier Swedish team is a lot more difficult than convincing someone to come and join Brighton or Chelsea. But as they sort of worked their way up the leagues and had slightly more pull, certainly within Sweden, it became more of a sort of de facto head of recruitment role, where Macaulay himself has admitted to sort of spending 250 days on the road in Sweden, going to just watch various players all over the place. And I guess the most relevant thing to us is that in bringing in Macaulay, there's going to be huge synergy between what Potter wants and what Potter needs for his system and his ideals, and sort of the identification, talent ID and tactical nous that Macaulay has, and sort of making sure that every player that he brings in and profiles is going to have an obvious place within Potter's structure, whether that's straight away or whether that's in 2 years' time, in the sort of way that we saw at Brighton. And it's likely to, just sort of smooth over a lot of the issues that we have seen, or at least heard talked about, between sort of Lopetegui or Moyes wanting a certain player, and then the director of football, technical director, wanting someone else, Sullivan perhaps not wanting someone. So hopefully that will just tighten up that sort of feedback loop, because there will be agreement across the board because of that understanding. But then I guess the other thing fans will want to know is about sort of, okay, how good is he then? If he's going to come in as essentially a recruitment figure, what is it that he's done? And the fact of the matter is that he's done quite a lot, and quite a lot of impressive stuff. As I said, Chelsea I don't think is a fair litmus test at all, because I think anyone in that Chelsea structure at the time, it's really difficult to know who was responsible for what, because their recruitment team consisted of about 5 or 6 different people that all would have had different levels of sign-off. But also, I think even the players that were brought in, it's impossible to really judge them as to whether they've been a success or not, because some of them struggled for minutes in Mudryk. Some of them, as you say, just weren't able to really get on the pitch or were trying to break through. And then also, you can't really judge based on sort of value for money like you could at Brighton, because everybody knew Chelsea had loads of money, so everything feels like an overpay.
Well, their approach at the time was just ridiculous, right? They just went out and signed everyone. That was the whole. So, and it's difficult to know who's responsible for that.
Exactly.
I'm sure there'll be different people that have identified different players, some of which have worked, some of which haven't. But it's impossible to know kind of who's. Well, I imagine who the people responsible for that kind of overall strategy, which was so scattergun, were above individuals like Macaulay.
100%, and then that's why I sort of referenced the Swansea stuff, is that's obviously the season under Potter that he then managed to get the move to Brighton, and in that season a lot of the success was down to them being able to bring in Bersant Celina from Man City, who was 21 at the time, academy product, for about 3 million, and he went on to, I think it was something like 15 to 20 goals or assists from midfield. And then from then on, you look at what he achieved at Brighton, sort of a complete I think the one thing I'd like to make sort of most apparent from this is the complete range of signings. So like on the one hand, you have loan moves at Swansea and at Brighton, I guess kickstarting the careers of both Conor Gallagher and Mark Gahey. Obviously very well thought of players, but managing to find a space for them within that system that obviously then leads them to go and get big transfers, England caps, etc. And then when you arrive at Brighton, he's gone and sort of picked up good players in the Championship. Adam Webster had a really good spell Matt Clark to a lesser extent, but also for a much lesser fee. Tariq Lamptey from Chelsea's academy. Aaron Moy, who from Huddersfield at the time just managed to look like an absolute baller at Brighton. And then you get the really exciting ones, the Moises Caicedo, the Facundo Buonanotte, the Jan-Paul van Hecke, all of whom he's been credited with. But then also sort of Danny Welbeck. Who would have saw that one paying off, really? A 29-year-old who's been released by Watford on a free. And he's just gone, actually, you know what? I know what Graham wants at the focal point of this system, and I think Welbeck could come in and do it, and he's been there ever since. So I think it's easy when you think of, the guy that was in charge of recruitment at Brighton, he's going to go and sign loads of players from Paraguay, like Julio Enciso, or he's going to find us the next Caicedo. If he does, absolutely brilliant. I'm all for it. But I think also those sort of Adam Lallana, Danny Welbecky picks are just as valuable. And I think that's the most exciting thing, is it's not just someone who can go and dig for gold in undervalued leagues, but he can also find undervalued or underappreciated talents that maybe people would often overlook and then get the best out of them. Obviously helped by the fact that Potter is a coach who is also capable of doing that.
Yeah, nice marriage really between a coach who's known for doing that with his players and a recruitment analyst who's known for picking maybe lesser known or lesser fancied players and syncing them up with a coach who's very good at making them look much better than they have previously. So an exciting bit of news, I think, and we're going to talk about it more on Extra Time. There are a couple of other things that we're going to talk about on there. Ollie Scarles, we barely got a mention here, and I want to talk about him. Could he have gone down? He dribbles Munoz in the box. It would have been 1-1 and it would have completely changed the game. Really good individual performance here, and we'll talk about him and others on ET. But you've got to zip off. So thank you, Cal. Thank you again for listening. Again, thank you for all the sign-ups on Patreon. And we will catch you next week to discuss another game against Aston Villa, which... yeah, it's kind of an interesting one to look ahead to. So looking forward to doing the whole process, because they've got a few players missing in midfield. So it'd be interesting to see how they adapt. And I think a week on the training pitch for us, and opportunity to get a couple of back. I think seems like a couple might be back in time. Maybe Somerville, which would make a huge difference if he was back, and to get some. Yeah, just to have some rest and get some energy back into the legs, I think will put us in a much better position ahead of the game against Villa, even if Villa are opposition that you feel much more concerned about than Crystal Palace, though Palace had been on an amazing and continue to be on an amazing run away from home. So yeah, we'll see you then, and until then, come on you irons.